I do think that something kind of historic for the world happened at Davos. This is the World Economic Forum meeting. Davos is this little ski resort area right here. I've always wondered what this was all about. It's a super swanky place with luxury hotels. All these different heads of state go to the meeting. It costs £25,000, maybe about $30,000 per person to attend. There's some serious dialogue happening at Davos. And I mean, I say that a little tongue in cheek, but it does kind of seem like the coolest conference in the world. And the World Economic Forum is basically the heartbeat of globalization. It's where ideas like ESG, investing, environment, social, and governance come from. Ideas like net zero energy. And there's kind of this aura around Davos and the World Economic Forum. There was this guy, Samuel Huntington. This guy right here, a famous Harvard professor. He coined the term Davos man, which is this idea of a person who is benefiting from the increasingly integrated global economy. It's part of a new global elite. Jeffrey Epstein was kind of obsessed with the World Economic Forum in Davos. You got all the characters, Bill Clinton, Angela Merkel from Germany, Bill Gates, Alex Soros, who inherited billions from his dad, Gavin Newsom, and now you get Donald Trump, apparently shattering the world order. Because honestly, the World Economic Forum, Davos, this is kind of the heart of like the European thing, the European identity, which centers a lot around dialogue. And Trump went in there and said that Europe is going in the wrong direction. And I have a little bit of a different take on what he's actually doing as opposed to what he says with his words. But anyway, CNN says that this is an antagonistic speech. The Guardian, a newspaper out of the UK, said something even worse. And at issue is that Trump said that the West can't mass import failed cultures. He cited the Minnesota fraud cases and particularly the Somali population. And based on my research, what really is going on here is a question about multiculturalism and viewing the entire world as one body. Here's an article, for example, from the Yale Review of International Studies. As you see, Yale is a super progressive place, and for them to be questioning this just late last year, and even in Brussels, the heart of the European Union, publishing articles, The Beauty and Burden of Diversity in Europe, they're starting to question this idea. This idea was born out of this idea of humanitarianism, that we have almost this obligation to the entire world. But as I teased earlier, I think that there's more to what Trump's doing than what he's saying with his words. From his own national security strategy, one of his goals is to restore Europe's civilizational self-confidence and Western identity. So while The Guardian might say this, I honestly get the feeling that Trump is trying to force Europe to act in its own best interests, and it's gonna have to change some things. Because at the end of the day, being actually productive, not just dialogue, but being actually productive, producing things does matter. And I think Trump thinks that too. He went in and said that the stock market in the US has hit 52 all-time highs. And in his speech, he also said that Switzerland made $41 billion on us, talking about the United States. He said that the United States is keeping the whole world afloat. What is he talking about? Well, the US had a physical trade deficit with Switzerland of about $41 billion. That's what he's talking about. And you'll see here that a senior economist says that's not accurate. I think this is emblematic of the whole thing. This person, I'm sure they're a nice person, Ryan Young, is analyzing the economy. And the reason that Mr. Young says this is not accurate is because the US has a services trade surplus. What's a services trade surplus? Services trades are things like management fees. Like here's Europe's management consulting industry. It's worth $45 billion in GDP. That's a lot of billions for dialogue and analysis. But Trump is not that into making money from analysis. He's focused on reviving America's manufacturing industry. Now, is this crazy? Should he just be thinking, hey, listen, let's just make money from services? One of the most interesting things I found out in my research for this that I want to share with you, and this comes from the World Economic Forum itself, is that GDP was actually a wartime metric. It was designed to show what your economy can produce when you're at war. And I know that we're not at war, we're not going to war, I hope. Let's not do war, and society changes. But if you look at what EU has been focusing on, it's stuff like net zero, declining energy production, and touting that they're making $45 billion in their GDP on management consulting. Some high quality dialogue. But the kind of stuff that Trump is looking at as a person who cares about hardware and land and traditional statecraft stuff is things like the Greenland deal, where he is saying that they've reached a deal to get sovereignty over certain US bases. We'll see how this whole Greenland deal thing shakes out. But he did launch this Board of Peace to rival the United Nations. He says that's not what it's for, but basically it's kind of a group of countries like Israel, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Argentina. Now, what is different about this group of countries? Well, my read is that a lot of these countries are more realists. Here is Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, in his speech at the World Economic Forum this year. He said that the Americas will be the beacon of light that will once again illuminate the entire West, that he wants to focus on the history of Greek philosophy, Roman law, and Judeo-Christian values, and return to the ideas of liberty. What I hear a lot of here is capitalism, meritocracy, and notably not in the Board of Peace initial countries. Europe, the World Economic homies are not in the group. So Ursula von der Leyen, the EU president, is saying that Europe needs to push for more independence. Emmanuel Macron from France is urging European preference in tech. Europe should build its own digital solutions. The problem is Europe hasn't been doing that kind of stuff. Their energy production is down, and you know what you need for technology? You need a lot of energy. And Europe loves dialogue. I live there, I know. When you're making $45 billion in management consulting, that's a lot of airplanes, airports, airport lounges, hotels, dinners. It's not a lot of wartime GDP type stuff. And what Macron and von der Leyen are talking about involves changing their societies fundamentally. Here is a graphic that shows you the number of people who are dependent on European welfare systems at different years. So if you zoom in, for example, in 2014, there were, let's say in France, 57 people were dependent fully on the system. So that is, there is 43 people producing stuff and 57 people taking stuff. And just look at the trend there. By 2050, under the current system, 74 people will be taking stuff from the system net in France, and only 26 are going to be the ones producing the stuff. Germany is even more stark. 83 people depending on 17 people to produce all the stuff for the rest of them. So while the mainstream media will say, oh, Trump is shattering the world order, that's what he means when he says Europe is heading in the wrong direction. And what's their answer? Well, EU President von der Leyen, in her push for independence, she said that Europe needs to speed up its push for independence because the world has changed permanently. They need to engage in some dialogue.